Well, you're stupid and I don't respect you. Wizard, more like wimpzard.
Okay, dude, for real. Just let me have my moment. You keep talking over me. Oh, come on, man. What's going on? You're taking too long with your turns. You should have been planning what you were doing instead of being on your TikToks or whatever. That's it. That's it. Oh, no.
My group just completed a 5-year campaign, and honestly we lost one party member because of scheduling issues. I'm Jared from Carpe Diem, and today we're going to talk about conflict. We're talking about preventing it from confronting it, and if it comes down to it,
final round, fight!
Having someone removed from the table. First, we covered tip number 0. I call it tip number 0 because it happens in session 0. Session 0 is a way to set expectations and boundaries and rules before you ever roll any dice. If you don't know what a session 0 is, there are plenty of guides out there that talk about it, but it's a way of managing people's expectations. This is a very complex and very open to interpretation game. So when you come to the table, you may have different expectations, interpretations than other people do. Now, typically this is done to talk about like the content, things like sexual assault not being okay in a game, or child murder, or drug abuse, or depending on everyone's comfort level, find a game that sits perfectly within their comfort zone, but it's still fun to tell as a group. Now, I do want to say that you shouldn't just go over rules or subject matter. One of the biggest things is going to be table etiquette expectations. You have to establish those norms and what you expect of them. This includes things like interruptions, talking when it's someone else's turn, metagaming, having your phone or tablet at the table for non-D&D things, the concept of trusting the DM. He's there to make sure that you have fun. Here are some common norms that I feel like cannot have enough emphasis on because of how important they are. First one is interruptions. Interruptions can be utilized at a good time, but when they're too numerous for people to have their moments, it becomes an issue. So sometimes just a simple table saying as, hey guys, hush up, or hey guys, eyes up, or hey guys, focus down. Sometimes that's a great way to tell people, hey, your side conversations are not welcome at this time. Other times you certainly can have side conversations, especially when somebody's trying to figure out what they're doing in combat. 2 other players may be having a side conversation describing what they're going to do with each other. My table doesn't typically say that that's meta because I'm kind of assuming that they've had similar conversations around the campfire or at some other time, and now they're just kind of looking at each other and giving each other a nod. It's part of the fantasy that we have for this setting. That leads into talking when it's someone else's turn. When somebody's trying to have their moment and they're trying to engage or they're trying to role play, there are times when you shouldn't be talking to the other people at the table. All attention should be focused on that player. Give them their chance so that way they can have yours. Again, this ties into interruptions. Metagaming. So metagaming is one of those things that, is it the memorization of the monster manual, or is it just a small conversation about what your character would do? For me, I'm pretty lenient on metagaming. I feel like metagaming makes the game fun. It makes you feel like you're the Avengers or you're superheroes and you have this really cool vibe with your friends to where you know exactly what your move is going to be so they can act on it next, and it just seems more fun to do it that way. Now, at the same time, if somebody tries to call me out over a change stat block, well,
I am God.
So there will not be any changes to that. Another one is phones at the table. I do not allow anything that's not D&D related at the table. This was hard because we've got a lot of Cowboys fans where I live, and football on Sundays is hard to ignore. Obviously, you can check text messages from the wife, answer calls as needed, but generally I want you to stay with your attention on the table. Another thing is to trust the DM. The DM's one job is to make sure that the other players have fun. That's why it becomes fun for us as DMs. One thing I want to express to a lot of my players is that challenge is what makes this game so interesting. So if it feels like I'm picking on your character or that you're getting unfair advantage, like basically if a ruling doesn't go your way and it feels unfair, the DM is just making a ruling in the moment. when you have an issue at the table, it is so much easier to discuss it after and retcon anything that happened than stand there and have an argument between the DM and yourself. You don't need to discuss the verbiage of each particular rule. Just let the DM have that quick ruling, and later on you can say, hey DM, on this part, I don't think that should have happened. Would it be okay if I have 10 hit points back? Or would it be okay if this character didn't do that particular thing? Retcons are easy and they're very forgivable, and it shows kind of a bit of teamwork and trust that you have as a DM and you have as a player. One of the big things to talk about is cheating. This is a game built on trust. We're going to trust that you're running your character sheets as they are. It is very easy to go in there and just click edit and add some points here or add another feat here. And the idea is that we're trusting you not to do that. You are not creating a god. You are not heroes. Your adventure has not happened yet. So you don't want to be so overpowered that the DM is working really, really hard to make these encounters that are fun and balanced, and then you just overpower them. That's not satisfying for anyone except maybe you. All right, so you've established your norms. It's game time. But how do you handle a player that has overstepped their bounds? First of all, as a DM, if you see the player that has overstepped their bounds or has done something, a breach of what you agreed on, don't yell at them. Don't call them out. Don't berate them. Don't escalate it. A shouting match does no one good. Everybody loses. Just make it real quick, real quiet. Hey, remember we talked about this? Keep it quiet, or whatever the infraction is. And just try to go on as best you can. They'll get the idea that you're not trying to yell at them. You're just trying to get them to be a better participant in the game. One other thing, if there is a player that drives you crazy, make sure that you as a DM, you're not ruling based on your like of players, but you're being consistent and you're being fair. If there's a ruling that you make for one character, it applies to everybody else, including your own characters or your own NPCs, monsters, whatever. Another thing is, as a DM, never shoot down an idea, no matter how bad it is at the start. Let the player kind of work through it. Some people just verbally process, and maybe they have an idea that they haven't baked yet, and if you're a DM, you're probably somebody who has the ideas in their almost finished stages when it's presented to the group. Players are not like that typically. They will have an idea that they're really excited about, but they don't know how it would fit in. Don't dismiss them out of hand. You always want to be seen as approachable. Even if 99% of the time you say, no, we can't do that, give it a no, but. No, I don't think an errr Cochrane could be a bomber per se, but what if you try something like this, more within the rule set? No, but is almost always a good alternative to yes and. It shows that you are reasonable. It shows that you are trying to work with that person to make the best fun for this game, even if it doesn't exactly fit with what you're working on. Another thing, and this is something that I struggle with a lot, is you always want to follow up with people. So if somebody asks a question or makes a change, or there's some type of ruling in the middle of your game that you save for later, make sure you make note of it. That should be one of the biggest reasons that you as a DM are taking notes during a session. Make sure you make a note of it, and then be sure to follow it up. To clarify, in Discord, there's the ruling. I messed this up. There you go. You guys will each have plus 10 hit points to make up for whatever it is, right? Always be the person, be that DM that's thinking about it, that's following up. It could be the day after, it could be midweek after, it doesn't matter. Just make sure that it's there. And finally, this tip is crucial. If you do have a player who does something that's so egregious, that's so serious, it merits of you want to be sure that you're covering your bases, give them a written warning. Okay, writing things down is not impersonal, and it's not without heart, and it's a great way to collect your thoughts, to make sure that that's exactly what you want to say, and to have a paper trail in case they try to argue against, or if they just have a big stink about it later. This stems from being professional, having that paper trail, being able to always refer back and ensure that you're correct in what you're saying, because phone calls and direct conversations, especially on D&D nights, they can be, forgetful. So make it written. Make sure you're able to call out exactly what the egregious infraction is. Like, what is it exactly that they did? The last thing you want to do is just kind of have this vagary gray area where the player doesn't even know what it is they did. So how can they possibly watch out for it in the future or improve? For them, it just sounds like you don't like them and you're ready to get rid of them. Which, if that's the case, just be subtle about it. One thing you want to do is give them a very clear way to improve their behavior. You want to make it very obvious that I want you to stop your side conversations. If I have to get onto you 3 times per session, then that's too many. We need to really think about what our priorities are when we play this game. And if you don't make it as silly as like whenever they talk and you have to tell them to be quiet, give them a post-it note. That way they can keep track of what they're doing. Because a lot of times players are just excited and they just want to be here. They're not meaning to interrupt and they're not meaning to talk over people. They just feel like they have so much important stuff to say. And so a physical reminder might be a good idea. Regardless, make it tangible, make it measurable, and make sure it has a timeline in there if that's required. Setting these clear expectations is crucial from the start, and being clear and concise is pretty important when you're addressing the behavior. Unfortunately, it has happened. A player has overstepped their bounds in a major way, or they just cannot come to terms with the expectations and warnings that you've given them. Honestly, it's time to part ways, and it's not always a bad thing. Sometimes players just aren't good mixes for the table that you run, and they would be happier if they were elsewhere, you'd be happier without that person, and it's just a better fit for everybody. You, as the DM, it is your responsibility to make sure that the table that you're running and the game that you're playing is exactly what you want. Bit of advice for this: don't be the mom that threatens to turn the car around but never does it. You know what I'm talking about? If you give them a warning with a clear outcome and objectives and they ignore it, you have to be the one that pushes that consequence. They have to know that their actions are affecting others and therefore it has a consequence. There is an outcome of what they do. If you say you're going to do it, make sure you stick to that. Once again, if you're removing somebody from the group, make sure it's written, make sure it's public. Don't do this in a sneaky, underhanded way. You want to be sure that the reason is very well documented and very clearly established. They may disagree with it, but if you have it written down and they did not follow that from their warnings, it's a lot easier to get this kind of thing enforced. Now, before this happens, you have to ask yourself, when I remove this player, can I do this with a clean conscience? Am I removing this player just because I don't like them, or is there a legitimate game-tied reason that they can no longer work with this table? If they don't work, know that taking them from the table is the right course of action, and you should not feel guilty about it, even if they're your friend or your cousin, because to be honest, they're probably happier without that table as well. And finally, if you need another opinion, don't hesitate to reach out to others in the group. They have just as much of a stake in this game as you do. So if you do have a problem player, ask the other players if they're seeing the same thing. Be open, be honest about it. I wouldn't announce it to them while they're there, but having some of the other players also in on your inner thoughts is kind of crucial. While it can feel like you're ganging up on the player with the issues, it's important to know that it's not just the DM that's having the issues here. If you involve other players, especially earlier on when you're giving out warnings, they can help enforce, they can help reiterate, get more people on your side. And that way it doesn't feel like it's just a mano-a-mano one-on-one battle. It's you as a group coming to this decision. So there you go, guys. That's basically the crux of it. First of all, set really strong expectations in your session 0. Second of all, when enforcing it, make sure that you're not trying to just start an argument. Make sure you're being fair, make sure you have everything written down, and make sure that you're being clear and concise as to what behavior you want that player to conduct themselves with as the game goes on. And finally, if you do need to remove the player, do it as professionally as possible. Know that sometimes it absolutely is merited to remove somebody, and make sure you do it without feeling guilty about what's happened. So if you've ever had experience with a player that was just not vibing with the table, or one that you had to remove, leave it down in the comments. I would love to hear some of the horror stories that you guys may have when dealing with difficult other players. That's it. I'm Jared from Carpe Diem, guys. We covered how to handle conflict from the very beginning to the end, and I appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, do all the things down below. And remember, never stop communicating.